Can't tell. Is your microphone on?
Okay, let's start.
1 minute, so everybody hang tight. Oh, there we are. Call to order the May Finance Committee meeting. Before we get started, I would like to point out for the council members at the DIAS, we do have the schedule for the budget meetings. And I believe the city's clerk's office was sending out meeting notices on those this afternoon for your calendar. I did accept a few of them. Number two, there are two items I'd like to pull off the agenda. C10 was something, it was a resolution on something to do with the transit system. It turns out the fee we had in mind was included in the base price, so that had to be pulled. And G2, the staff needs to do some more work on the contract, so we're pulling G2. Ben, will that one come back in next month?
That's our plan. Yes, sir.
That will come back next month. We will now go to the consent item. And I will notice the committee is here as well as three other council members. We appreciate everybody being here today, and the mayor has joined us. Please notice on consent that the city manager is arranging these by category, which I thought was an excellent idea, so you can kind of see what's going on a little bit better. And with that, are there any items anyone would want pulled? I don't see any hands. Can I get a motion to approve?
I move for approval of the consent agenda.
Second.
We have a motion, a second, approve consent agenda. I believe we vote for this orally. Is that correct?
Correct.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All opposed? That was AI there. We had the vote on the screen before we voted. See, it read our minds. That's what we're coming to. Anyway, with that, we will now go to the general agenda. We have a very special guest here today.
Item G1, presentation on the economic impact of Piedmont Triad International Airport.
Mr. Mayor, would you like to introduce our guest?
Yeah, thank you very much. It's my honor to serve on the Piedmont Triad Airport Authority as your representative, and I'm honored to have appointment to that. Once a year, Kevin Baker, the executive director of the airport, goes to the various jurisdictions into Triad and gives an update on what's going on there. I tell you, there's a lot of exciting things happening at the airport. So, Kevin Baker, if you would tell us what's going on.
Mr. Baker, if you please give your name and address for the record, and then you may begin.
I will. It's Kevin Baker, and my address is 1000A Ted Johnson Parkway, Greensboro 27409. Thank you, Mr. Mayor, Mr. Chair, and members of the committee. I was here just about exactly a year ago. It was May 9th of last year. I noticed on last year's presentation, and the mayor told me it would largely be the same group. And so I wanted to try and change this up just a little bit so that I'm not saying exactly the same thing I said to you a year ago. I'm going to be very brief, just have a few slides, but that'll leave whatever time you would like to ask any questions you might have. So mainly, these are sort of cocktail party snippets for you, basically, about what's going on at the airport. Summary slides. We've got just 4 slides and then some photos on slides. Talking about air service, which is something obviously everybody wants to know. Jobs at the airport, the economic impact of the airport, which is huge, by the way. And then the status of some of the projects that you've heard about, some of them that we talked about last year that we're just getting started, and show you where they are now. And then I'll talk a little bit about where some new things are for us. So, and by the way, please stop me at any point if you want to just have a discussion on any of these. So starting with air service, obviously COVID hurt airports all across the country very badly when it comes to passengers. Airports of our size and smaller really struggled to return to the pre-COVID levels. We used to have that same speech long ago.
Same story, different.
Exactly, 20 years later. And so it is, I think where we find ourselves now is having a very strong year compared to last year. We're up double digits each month, 12, 14, 15%. The numbers are still not quite to 2019, but they have gotten back to 2018. Important differentiation there is that 2019 was a really, really strong year. So if you looked at it on a graph before COVID got here, we had this really strong year in 19, and then of course in 20, everything just fell off the cliff. So you're comparing back to an anomaly year because it was so high. So we've really focused a little bit more on 18, and we're there at 18. So I feel pretty good that we've basically gotten back to where we were. You may have heard that we announced Dulles service returning yesterday. That's United Airlines. They served Dulles before COVID and dropped it with COVID. And then what happened was there was a pilot shortage, and you probably are all familiar with this and heard too much of it over the last few years. But the CEO of United Airlines, Scott Kirby, in 2021, somewhere near the end of 2021, was quoted as saying that this pilot shortage had led them to parking 120 airplanes, or 112 airplanes, I think it was, in the desert, because they couldn't get crews to fly them. And these were mainly regional jets, smaller jets, and it was what United used to serve the Dulles market from our market. So therefore, those planes were sitting on the ground, not being used, and we haven't had service since then. So we've been really hammering on United Airlines since then to try and get this back because it's a really, really important market for us. You might not think it's all that important because most of the politicians will go into DCA, Reagan Airport, but this is an important connecting hub for United, especially internationally. So about 70% of the people who get on these airplanes here are going to Dulles to connect internationally. So having that back for us is really important. Last year, it was right at the end of September, we started Denver service with, again, United to Denver, direct service. It is really a great route. If you haven't done it yet and you have a reason to go out to Denver, or to points beyond, right? Use it as a connection as well. Please do. Please urge everyone you know to do it because we've got to use this service or we'll lose it. So far, it's performing really well. It's on an Embraer 175, which is sort of like a mini 737 is what it looks like. Nice airplane. Maybe a little bit small for that long of a haul, but it is good enough. And I think, if we can really show strong numbers on these flights, they'll upgauge that airplane to something larger. So most of our flights have returned. Most of the cities that we had service have returned at this point, and upgauging is a trend really in the whole industry, but certainly one that's affecting us, where you might have used to have a 50-seat regional jet on a certain market. Now you've got a 70-seat regional jet, or you have an Airbus 321 or a 737. That's really good for us because the seats are increasing significantly, and seats are really what drives prices, not numbers of flights. It's the seats that's what the airlines are selling as a seat. So our seats are actually ahead of where they were in 2019. So that's all very good. With respect to jobs, and these numbers are not ours. These numbers are prepared by the state of North Carolina DOT, and they do this every 2 years. They're right now doing the next round of it. So the numbers that I'm quoting you here are actually almost 2 years old. So it's even going to be higher than this. But the numbers that they had for us last time were 8,600 people. That's direct employees. That's people working on the airport property. It's not counting off property. It's not counting consultants, lawyers, engineers, people who bring uniforms to the airport, that kind of thing. Those numbers are much, much larger. But I thought what might be interesting to you all is that of those 8,600, roughly 2,000 of them live in Forsyth County. And about half of those live also in the city limits of Winston-Salem. So said a different way, the airport is a 1,000 job market for Winston-Salem. So this is a substantial place of employment really for the entire triad. It makes us actually the 5th largest employment center in the triad. That's if you go to the Triad Business Journal's book of lists and you add 8,600 people. It's a little bit disingenuous, right? Because there's 50-some companies on the airport, but they have to be there. It's a campus where they need to be. And so I don't find it disingenuous at all. It's a center, it's a campus where they have to be, and it is a center of employment without question. That number, by the way, in 2012, I think it was, the number was 3,600. So here we are, roughly 10 years later, 12 years later, and it's tripled, all by plan. The economic impact, again, not my numbers. These numbers come from DOT, $9 billion an annual impact from the airport. Again, you can see the 8,600 direct jobs. That translates to about 22,000 total jobs. I usually stay away from the indirect jobs because it's a nebulous idea. You have to, I can go point to the zip codes of the 8,600 people. whereas the others are working in companies off campus, under contract, that kind of thing. But they're there. I was one for 20 years as a consultant to the airport. That was an indirect impact, and I worked pretty much full-time as a consultant to the airport. Most importantly, probably, is the average salaries. You see here, between $85,000 and $93,000. We're fine-tuning this right now through another survey. But the average household income within about 35 miles of the airport is $51,000 or $52,000. These are single earners. The average household income, that could very well be 2 earners in that house. So what are we saying here? That we're saying that the average person working on the airport is making fully 150% of average household income. So the message is lots of jobs and good paying jobs. So this is a place where the state and the community should be investing. And that's what's been happening. I've been telling that story for 10 years, and the state especially has made huge investments in our airport, which has led to these opportunities that we have now. You just look at that salary number, $731 million just in direct salaries. That's taking the smaller number, $85,000, and multiplying it by the 8,600 to get that number. Huge numbers. Imagine just the state payroll tax on that. State payroll tax is right now just under 5%, if I remember right. So you're talking about $36 million just in payroll taxes, just from those who directly work on the airport. Now think about the other impacts. They move into town. They go and they buy a house. A realtor sells them the house. Realtor gets a commission. Realtor's car was getting old. Realtor says, hey, time to replace this old car. They go and they buy a car. Dealer makes a sale. You get the point. I won't belabor it. It goes through. This is going through our economy every single day, and it's really, really an important part of that economy. So let's talk about a couple of those things. And I've been saying an awful lot over the last year, and I may have said it here last year. If I did, I'm sorry to repeat it again, but that we're standing on the shoulders of giants. And what I mean by that is that there are a lot of people who came 10 years before us, 20 years before us, 50 years before us, who made a lot of really smart decisions to buy land primarily and to extend runways, to build taxiways, et cetera. But, you know, where we found ourselves here about 10 or 12 years ago was all of these assets were in place and ready to go. And it's sort of that old success occurs at the intersection of opportunity and preparedness. But we started making sure that we were going to be ready. And Alan, with a number of other board members that are hugely supportive, we were able to get to a point where whenever these companies came into town and wanted a spot, we were able to say, yeah, we got that. So boom, you know what, where we were. You've heard a lot about Boom, obviously. They're getting very close to their ribbon cutting. I'm going to show you a few pictures at the end of this just so you can see. If you haven't driven by the airport recently, go take a ride. It's just really cool to drive through on 73 and see what's going on. So they're going to, you look for a ribbon cutting announcement probably over the next 6 to 8 weeks, I would say. Honda, you may have heard, has recently announced that they're going to be adding a stretched model of their airplane that it would seat 11 or 12 people to their fleet. They need that. They need to have a larger airplane as part of their fleet as well, and that's just a really great announcement to hear from them. That's called the Echelon. Marshall, which is a British company that works on C-130s. So they're an MRO. In our world, that's maintenance, repair, and overhaul. So it's a service station, basically, for airplanes. They work exclusively on C-130s, and they're locating here in the U.S. so that they can work for the U.S. Department of Defense. They work for 22 or 23, I think it is, nations worldwide. Again, a British conglomerate, great people. That building, you'll see it here in just a second. They intend to occupy it in January. First airplane in there in January. I think last year when I was here, I talked about the fact that we have a lot of interest in the airport. At that time, I think we had 12 or 15 companies who were very much interested in coming to the airport. A lot of those were, you don't know whether they're for real kind of projects, but half of them at least were definitely real. Some of them have gone quiet a little bit over the last year, but it really has started picking back up now. And I like the chances of a couple of these things coming to fruition pretty soon. So just keep your eye on it and you'll see what happens. So I showed you this picture last year, which was a rendering of the Boom factory in the background and their aircraft, which is called the Overture, in the foreground. And I showed you this, which is a rendering of the Marshall hangar. You can see some C-130s parked there next to it. So this is an overview, aerial view of the Boom building under construction. This was taken about 3 weeks ago. That building, just to give you a little bit of scale, it doesn't look all that big in that picture. The building is 940 feet long and about 200 feet wide, so it's very long. And if you can imagine, inside that building is basically an assembly line. Starting on the left side of it, plane gets its wings put on, it moves down, it gets the tail section put on, it moves down, they put the landing gear, engines, et cetera. You get to the end, it rolls out as a completed airplane. So that's kind of the way that building will function. You may have heard that in the last 2 months, I guess it was just about 2 months ago, they flew their XB-1 demonstrator airplane in the California desert. And then just about a month ago, they got approval to be able to fly that airplane at supersonic speeds. That's something that has to get a special approval for. And so they're going to begin testing that at supersonic speeds, which is just, it's a real milestone, 2 real big milestones that they've hit. So we're excited to see how that continues to play out. The Marshall building is equally large. If you look in the very bottom left of the picture, you see an 18-wheeler sitting there that gives you a little bit of scale for how big this building is. That's half of the building that you're looking at. You can kind of see that there's 4 bays that are built into it where the planes will pull in on the right side, they're coming in from that concrete. And then there'll be a mirror image of what you see there built on the back side of it as well, a total of 7 hangars initially. And then ultimately, it can expand to the upper right of the image by another 5 bays. So we can ultimately get this to be 12 hangar bays. And again, that's, each one of those bays means a C-130 in there getting worked on and a crew of people who are there to work on each one of those airplanes. And then just to give you a final kind of look at where we are, the foreground, in the foreground, you see the area that's all cleared. Right in the middle of the picture, you see, I can't point to it, can I? Can I point to it from here? So this building right here, if you all can see it, I'm sorry to make you have to turn around. That is that. So you see how big that is and see how small it looks on this image. Mm-hmm. That gives you a little bit of feel for how much land we have out there, how much is graded. You can see all of this cleared land ready to go. I love telling the story of the reporter who came to me after the announcements for Marshall and Boom and said, hey, you've got Marshall and Boom. I guess you guys are all full up over there now. You're done. And I said, well, collectively, they're taking up 9% of what we have ready to go. So we are very actively pursuing other companies. And the area that you kind of see here in the foreground is over 1,000 acres. To put that in perspective, if you go to Charlotte, sort of the inner beltway that goes around Charlotte, I think it's 275 maybe, that if you were to lift Charlotte up from the limits of that interstate, you could plop it all down right there and it would fit. So you're talking about sort of the whole central business district of Charlotte would fit on this site. So we think that there's all sorts of opportunities and really looking forward to see what comes next. And with that, I'll take any questions.
Kevin, just a few comments. First off, I want to thank you for putting in the parking with pay with credit card. I never have quarters. And so I always had to.
We've heard that from a couple folks.
For hope that I could get in and get my passenger before I got noticed, but thank you for doing that. Secondly, on the Boom, do you have any idea how the size of that plane compares with an old SST?
With the old SST, I don't. It's got to be very, very similar. Yeah, it's a little bit shorter. The airplane's 201 feet long and 99-foot wingspan, I think it is. So it's a very long and narrow. It's a dart. It's meant to go very fast, obviously. But I just don't remember the Concorde's dimensions.
Because I've seen a Concorde up close, but yeah. Look forward to that.
Yeah, I think what you're going to see is something marginally smaller, but not a lot smaller. Yeah.
Any other questions, Ms. Scipio?
This is fascinating. I'm so excited. Aviation is just so fascinating. If you grew up when I did, where we had propeller planes, that was the most exciting thing. And Piedmont Airline went from propellers to jets. That was just amazing. In the Boom manufacturing, is that just a single line? Would the plane come from one end and go to the other? It's just a single assembly line?
Yes, quite literally. Let me go back to that picture. So if you look at that image on the left side, of the short side on the left side, all you see is a couple of like garage doors there. I'll point them out up here, right here and here. Those are only sized to be able to get parts moved in. So a wing section would come in through there. A fuselage will come in through there. If I showed you the other end, which I'm sorry, I don't have a picture of the other end, but on the other end, there's a full-size hangar door. So the airplane will come in on this left side, start to get assembled, and once it's done, it'll roll out on its own wheels on the opposite end. Now, there'll be extra buildings. What you see off to the right where the dirt looks kind of dark brown, that's an area that's just finished, getting graded, and that will be where they have a finishing facility. So in these buildings, they'll put seats, interior finishes, and that can be custom done to whatever the end user would be. There'll also be a paint hangar there to be able to paint the airplanes in the livery of whatever airline, et cetera.
And how many jobs are we expecting with Boom?
1,750.
And technical skills?
So the skills there are going to range everywhere from obviously entry-level needs all the way through upper management. But the primary thing are going to be aircraft technicians because they're going to be assembling airplanes. So a lot of the skill sets, this is one of the reasons why we're so competitive for this stuff, because you've got Forsyth Tech now and Guilford Tech for the last 40 years in the world of training A&P power plant, A&P mechanics, so airframe and power plant mechanics. So, having that bench strength, and really, you mentioned Piedmont, a lot of that bench strength goes all the way back to the days when Piedmont was still here because of the hangars that are here at Smith Reynolds, a hangar that was at our airport that became U.S. Airways, that became Timco. And so those hangars have always had folks in them who are working on planes. So we've got a really, really deep bench strength in that skill set, and that makes us really competitive. Add that to, big sites and big runways and a great place to live and, it's a cheap cost of living and doing business, and just really puts us in the driver's seat.
Thank you. Mr. McIntosh?
I love to hear that your passenger numbers are up. I mean, it's so much nicer to fly out of PTI than
Definitely.
take the drive. It's a much better experience. I've read a lot lately about sort of impacts on constraint on airplane production. Boeing is in a world of hurt, and Airbus is like maxed out there. They can't at any capacity. Is that going to put a ceiling on throughput, passenger growth? And
Yeah, we go from one problem to the next in this industry. Obviously there was COVID, and what happened there, by the way, if you all don't know, is that during COVID, remember the first weeks. Go back in your brain and think about the first weeks of COVID. All the airlines were saying, "Oh my God, we're not going to have any passengers. We've got to get rid of all these people who we're paying." So they started offering early retirement. You have these very senior captains who step out and go retire. The medium captains move up. The ones who are flying the regional jets move up. All of a sudden now, you got no more production coming in because they're not training anybody else during COVID. So the regional jets are the ones that suffered. And airports like ours who rely on regional jets a lot really suffered. And then, so that we go through that pilot shortage. Now we're getting into a point of having equipment shortages. So it is definitely an issue. Boeing, I think they'll work through all this stuff, but they've gotten a triple whammy of sorts, I guess, and we'll just see how it plays out.
Yeah. Can you talk a little bit about the improvements at the facility, at your passenger facility?
Yeah, so we're right now in the early design stages of looking at what we're calling terminal modernization. So think about the main terminal still staying there. If you've been there recently, we remodeled it about 7 or 8 years ago. And it's, for the most part, fine. The downstairs is still kind of old and where the bag claim is. But the concourses themselves are old and tired. We know it. We got to fix them. We're going to. And we're still in the early stages of this. Expect to see something in the next few months. We're at about a 30% level design. We obviously have to go through our board and make sure that everybody's okay with where we're headed there. But, I think I could describe it as what we have there is a 42-year-old building, and lots of mechanical systems, roofs, HVAC, electrical. We have, a couple weeks ago, a huge pipe broke, So by the time you fix all of these things, and you can't do any significant structural changes to the building, I think that the code says you can't modify any more than 10% of it. before you then have to meet all the new codes. And there are certain new codes that this would have to meet. So after you end up doing all of that consideration, looking at a kind of a rebuild of the concourses is really where we probably fall. But more in a few months.
Expected completion?
Probably about 3 years. And the reason for that is that we have to live in this building while we're building this building. So imagine one of the concourses being taken out of service, move everybody to the other, build that side, and then reverse. So it's going to take a little bit of time.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Any other questions, comments? Ms. Adams?
Yes, thank you very much. How much is the assembly is robotics versus actual people?
I can't answer that question for you. I'm sorry. We'll know a little better, I suppose, after they start they're right now going to start moving all of that kind of equipment into the building. But I don't, I'm not even sure that we'll actually be able to find out a lot about that because that's going to be trade secret stuff that they don't want to get out there. But I would imagine that a substantial amount will be done by equipment. Okay. But they're still going to have 1,700 employees, so good employer.
Have you seen a substantial increase in supply chain providers to all of the companies that are at the airport?
Yeah, so there's been some really interesting stories there. There have been a number of them, yes. But in the case, for instance, of Honda, they used to have their wing made originally in Western Canada, I believe it was, and then it was being made in South Carolina. They decided to kind of put that all on campus. They're manufacturing that wing now on the airport, which is great because it brought extra jobs here, right? But, I think that was mainly so that they could control the quality and the timing of getting those parts and all of that kind of stuff. But the economic developers out there can talk to you an awful lot about the interest that some of the supply chain folks have in being in the area. I think we're just a few months away from that really picking up, because once these companies start to come online and actually start doing something instead of just building their buildings, what they're doing now, once they start needing those parts, I think that's going to start changing that equation.
How do you see the corridor fitting into Greensboro that goes to Montgomery and Randolph and Alamance and whatever?
The Carolina Core. I think it is. I think it's happening, right? It is just naturally happening. Obviously, with I think a lot of support from Mike Fox and PTP and that board and pushing everything along, and seeing these interstates, new interstate signs or new future interstate signs getting added, it's huge. I mean, we already have the best roadway system, I think, maybe in the country. I haven't been everywhere in the country to be able to judge that, but our interstate system here is phenomenal. And the companies know that, by the way. I mean, we have extra capacity. We probably have 20 years of extra capacity on our roads, which is amazing. And why is that important? Well, all those parts from those suppliers you just mentioned, the people who are working in these buildings, being able to get to work, maybe live further away from the airport because they can still get on interstate and be there in 15 minutes. So I think, having these new interstates added to what's already really good will be a big benefit to us. And I just think that it's for a long time, ever since I've lived here, which is 26 years now, a lot of people have talked about the fact that Raleigh, the Triad, Charlotte are all going to grow together. They call it the Piedmont Crescent, right? And it's just happening, and we're right in the middle of it, which is pretty cool.
I'm going to put a plug in. We need a flight to Baltimore out of Greensboro versus having to go to Charlotte or Durham. And I hope when you redo the concourse, you look at the seats. Those seats are old and uncomfortable. And some bright colors in if you have been in our Benton Convention Center?
Yes, I have.
It needs to be colorful, that people get excited about coming to the airport. Not just the name and where it is and the flight, but as you know, as a customer, if I'm there for 2, 3, 4 hours or whatever, I want to feel like I'm in a great space. It makes me feel good that I'm going to get on this great flight, great customer service, and I will always want to fly, as Councilmember McIntosh said, out of Greensboro.
Yeah, well, I hear all of it and agree with all of it, honestly. And I think that based on what we're starting to see from the architects, I think you're going to love it.
Okay.
I really do. One of the sort of guiding principles is to have concessions, so food and beverage kind of concessions, in places where you can stay there and be able to see multiple gates. So you can keep, because passengers, once they get through the security, they start to get nervous about when their airplane's there. And if they can sit somewhere and still be able to see their airplane pull up, then they know, pay the bill and go. So, that kind of thing is all being built into this. A lot of glazing, floor-to-ceiling glass. Our bigger concern right now is how to make sure we keep it cool with all this glass. So there's offsetting things that we've got to consider. And with regard to Baltimore, I cannot promise you that it is close.
Used to have it.
Boston is probably the biggest market that we do not have direct service to that we should. And we've got folks, in fact, we've got folks going tomorrow to talk about that market and some others that we think are important. Baltimore is definitely a market I'd love to see. Problem is, I just don't think any of our carriers will fly that market from here. It's unfortunate, but we will try.
Well, I want to thank you because I'm flying to Chicago in a month. And whenever I go to Chicago, I love the fact for years that I could fly out of Greensboro, whether it's American or United. I love it. Thank you so much.
Yeah, and this is kind of a story that you guys might like to know, because there was a time whenever we only had United.
Yeah.
Remember that? And there was a time when we only had United, whenever that ticket would cost $1,400, $1,500. And I'm talking about in 2005, 6, 7. So we lobbied for a long time to get competing service on that route and got American finally to serve that. And you see what happens to the prices. Now you can get there for $400, So yeah, and this is what we deal with all the time. It gives you a little peek under the covers as to what we're having to deal with. But yeah, the Chicago service is pretty strong right now. We also have competing service into New York, which is good, from Delta and American.
Thank you very much, Mr. Baker. Thank you for coming, and I will give you an invitation. Please come back next year.
Thank you all so much.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
It's the last item today. Anything else anybody would like to bring up? If not, we will stand adjourned.